a few people trickling in, so we'll wait just a second for everyone to get their seat. I am just so pleased to see you all come out on this February evening when it's cold and sort of dark outside. It's wonderful to have you here with us at the University of Southern Maine. So this is the Forum on American Democracy, and I want to start by extending my very deep gratitude to Nancy Pond and the Pond Family Foundation, whose vision and generosity make this forum possible. The commitment to public dialogue is a gift to both our students and our wider community. Nancy Pond is with us tonight with her daughter-in-law, Julia, so if we can give them a thank you. This year's forum could not come at a more timely moment. Across our nation, we are grappling with profound questions about democracy, citizenship, and the meaning of freedom itself. Universities like ours have a responsibility to be spaces where those questions can be asked openly and examined with both rigor and empathy. Understanding pluralism, our capacity to live together with difference, is not simply an academic exercise. It is essential to sustaining our democracy. So thank you for joining us in this shared work today. Our format this evening is that we'll have about 40 to 45 minutes of time with the panelists, and then we'll open it up for another 45 minutes or so for questions and engagement from the audience. I know that this group of panelists is very committed to engagement, so please don't be shy about asking questions or maybe answering questions they may pose. We have students who are going to bring microphones to you, so if you simply raise your hand when you're ready, they'll make sure that you can be heard. And so without further ado, I'll turn the event over to our provost, Adam Tushinsky.
Testing. Thank you, President Edmondson, for inviting us to participate in this important series. And I often like to say, and I'll say it again here, how honored I am to work with what I like to call an academic president. And this is a series is an example why. My name is Adam Tushinsky, and I'm the provost here at USM. And the provost, if some of you don't know, is the institution's chief academic officer. But given my characterization of the president, I'm proud to report that the president selected all of tonight's panelists. And what makes me so excited is she really got it right because it reflects her engagement with our mission of scholarship and teaching. As the president said, tonight's format is going to be a conversation. And I have the honor tonight of co-moderating with one of our amazing graduate students, Jay Els. Jay is a student in the Muskie School of Public Service in his final semester of studies, but he's had an interesting career before that. Prior to his time at Muskie, he served as the communications director for the Center for Tech and Civic Life. He has earned a certificate in public leadership from the Kennedy School. And as an Ollie Fellow in Muskie, he works with Professor Arcand on communications and accessibility. So turning now to our diverse and distinguished panel of faculty, I will try to keep it brief. And I'm going to introduce them all, and then we will begin the conversation after that. I want to start with the Muskie School and introduce the newest member of our faculty on the panel, Dr. David Kasdan. David is the Avangrid Endowed Professor of Sustainable Public Policy, and his work, appropriately rooted for this panel, is in neo-pragmatism, which focuses upon administrative philosophy and theories of governance. To his left is Professor Michelle Vasquez Jacobus, who I actually called upon some 7 years ago to have a similar panel because I'm so familiar with her work. But she is a professor of social and behavioral sciences. She has a master's degree in social work from NYU, a law degree from Stanford, and she has dedicated her career as a scholar and a teacher to community engagement and community engagement theory. And she has held positions to that effect both at USM and Bowdoin College. Dr. Ron Schmidt, to my right, is a Berkeley-trained political scientist with a specialization in political theory. He has published several books about democracy, perhaps most importantly for tonight, Reading Politics with Machiavelli, that focused on what the ancient world had to teach the contemporary worlds of Machiavelli about the relationship between governance to corruption and to violence. In addition to his book on Machiavelli, he has authored works on the politics of Los Angeles, American exceptionalism, and for perhaps the students here tonight, the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Haley, get in touch. You may also see him in national publications, local news stations, and hear him on NPR as a commentator on U.S. politics with a Maine perspective. And then finally, we have Dr. Adam Schmidt, no relation to Dr. Ron Schmidt. My first name's Adam. They both have the same last name, Schmidt, and Adam organized a Venn diagram picture for us tonight. So, but anyway, Adam is a faculty member in our School of Education Secondary Ed program. He is also a member of our history department. Dr. Schmidt publishes widely, but most relevant to this panel, I think, is his work on history and memory and how representation of the past shapes how we understand the present, both in the classroom and the public square. So as I said, if all goes right, this panel will turn into a free-form discussion. But I would like to start by inviting each member of the faculty here on the stage to share their own understanding of pluralism as it connects to your scholarship and field, or if you don't want to ask that question, to reflect on any prior ideas that surfaced at prior events in this series. If you don't like that one, just share some introductory thoughts about pluralism as you wrestle with the basic fundamental challenge that we all have of living in a political community that has competing notions of justice, value, fairness, and morality. So Dr. Schmidt.
This one?
Yes.
Thank you. It's difficult to talk about pluralism with a great deal of clarity because it's used in different ways in different contexts, which I guess is appropriate, as it conveys a sense of trying to capture a majority of different kinds of experiences that in some cases don't really go smoothly together. Within political science, ever since the 1950s, pluralism has had a very specific meaning. It's rooted in James Madison's idea of factions as a possible source of strength for politics in a republic. It morphed mid-20th century into a way of thinking about interest group politics. A strength of that is this assumption that the matter of our politics, of the shared world we have of persuasion and vision and ideas, can encompass far more viewpoints than any one particular person can think of. And so you empower people to bring their own ideas, their own vision of politics together, generally as parts of groups, to try to have access to decision makers and to try to affect the future. A disadvantage of that is that it tends to get people thinking in terms of expertise, right? If you represent a consortium of physicians in talking about medical policy, then what does somebody who isn't a physician have to tell you? If you represent a consortium of petroleum exporters, then there are certain people you accept as an expert. There are certain environmentalists you get to talk to, and then others who don't really have much of a call for that. And that, in a way, flies against the idea of pluralism itself. The American philosopher and student of psychology and of medicine and of history, William James, his vision of pluralism was that it basically comes down to the idea that someone whose understanding of the world makes no sense to you whatsoever, and yours makes no sense to them, and yet there's a way in which both of your understandings are completely right, even if you can never understand them. That vision of pluralism then imagines a kind of public space where we can come together and try to communicate, as hard as that is, with an eye towards creating a different kind of future together. And under those circumstances, almost anything goes. The only thing that is excluded from a valid place in that relationship are those who would reduce the kind of multiplicity that pluralism relies upon. So genocide, no. You don't get to decide that a certain group of people don't have a place in the room. Ignoring other people entirely or their experiences. If you don't know about them, that's something, and that's an area to learn. But to try to exclude altogether, that flies in the face of what pluralism means. Otherwise, as hopefully we'll try to achieve tonight, everybody has a valid place at the table for the conversation, and we'll see where all of us working together can take us.
Thank you, Ron. Dr. Schmidt?
Excellent. All right. Hi, everyone. I really view pluralism, I'm going to speak to this really from the lens of social studies education, as I think that's kind of where I center myself the most. I really see pluralism as being foundational to the work of education. If you go back to the very early arguments for public education in the United States and you look at the work of Jefferson and later folks like Horace Mann, it really is focused on this idea of the need to have education in order to sustain a democracy. How do we create an educated citizenry who can uphold and learn the Republican ideals that we want to see come to fruition so people can make good decisions about public policy and vote the right way and things like that? A lot of that work in the 1830s, 1840s was really focused on these ideas of instilling like the correct moral virtue. And I think where we've come since then has really kind of moved beyond that in more complex and nuanced ways. I think key to understanding, and I'm using democracy and pluralism a little interchangeably here for a second, so bear with me, but I think key to understanding the stakes of what we're talking about is looking at John Dewey and the idea that we need to move beyond the idea that democracy is a set of political processes through which we exercise our voice to elect people to represent us, but rather it's a fundamental way in which we relate to the people around us. My vision of education and my vision of social studies education is that we're learning to be in the world with other people. And if we're learning to be in the world with other people, we have to take seriously the idea that those other people have value, that they deserve to be thought of and learned about, that we need to be intentional and thoughtful with how we interact with people. And we have to understand that we all have our own horizons that we need to learn how to move beyond. We have to understand that our own experiences are not everybody's experiences. Key to this, I think, is looking at somebody like Paulo Freire, who really wanted to move education past this like banking model and more towards this kind of grappling with problem solving in ways that allow us to recognize the most marginalized voices in our communities and provide space for them to have a voice and to enter into actual legitimate conversation to move the dial on how we relate to one another. So that's really at the crux of it. And I think that pluralism to me means through education, providing the opportunity to develop those skills, starting when students are young and in kindergarten, like you have a voice, you deserve to be heard. What's your evidence for what you say? How can we acknowledge that, like dogs and cats both have value and it doesn't need to be one or the other? How do we lay those foundations early so that we can have a pluralistic society? Now, to close, I will say to Provost Tuchinski's last question, I think one of the things that I've really been struggling with in thinking about the Forum for American Democracy and thinking about what's been happening over the past few months is if we go back to the first event, Ibu Patel talked about how everybody can bring a dish to the potluck, and that's really kind of what pluralism is all about. As somebody who is kind of hardwired to critique how power operates in society, I wonder what that looks like in a society with very marked power differentials. What if you're not invited to the potluck? What if you don't feel safe at the potluck? And other variations of that. So that's kind of where my mind is right now of pluralism is great, but I think it assumes a lot that's divorced from our current reality and historically our reality as well.
Thank you. Professor Jacobus.
First of all, Provost Tuchinski, you lied to me. You said that I got to choose a different question than you've presented. But I'm going to work from my colleague, Dr. Schmidt's analogy to the potluck. Not everybody has a stove. Not everybody has money for the groceries. Not everybody can cook. In thinking about pluralism, first of all, pluralism to me is we're talking about diversity of point of view. And I know more about diversity than I do about pluralism, and I'm going to stretch a bit and say we're using the term pluralism largely because it's not always safe for us to use the term diversity anymore, and because that term is laden and subject to censorship even now. But I think about, so there, I need everybody's help on this one. There's a quote, and it's something, it's either attributed to Fitzgerald or Freud or Einstein.
It's a wide net.
And it's something like this, and I know you can all look it up, but don't, please. It's something like the sign of true genius or the sign of true mental health is the ability to hold two opposing viewpoints in your mind at the same time, either without going crazy or just to be able to hold them. So to me, that's at an individual level what pluralism would be in a classroom or in a society, where you have genuine different perspectives, different moral calculations, different values, and they may, in fact, be in conflict, but they are both, or all 5, 6, 7, 8, rainbow of them are all reasonable, are all worthy of merit and assessment. And in ethics, this is something that we talk about moral pluralism, ethical pluralism, and the importance of having different points of view together in a conversation. And I'm not so sure how far that goes. The Levine and Stark study from 6, 7 years ago, that diversity makes you brighter, totally buy that. You have to have the tension of difference of opinion, especially different perspectives, in order to solve complex social problems. You can't solve them from one lens. But there are limits, and I'm wrestling more and more, my students are wrestling more and more with how far do we go? There are some points of view on the perspective that are morally abhorrent. There are some points of view that, if brought into the conversation, will cause others to have to leave the conversation or not feel safe or feel directly threatened. And I'm not sure what to do in order to encourage different points of view, especially in a liberal bastion, as would be the public university. We need to encourage a range of opinion. We need to understand each other. But what if some of those opinions are so offensive as to be assaultive? Are there limits?
Thank you. And I do propose to the panel that we switch from the VU to the more familiar TU form after we introduce Dr. David Kasdan.
All right. Thank you, everyone, for coming. And I don't want to belabor definitions of value pluralism. I think my colleagues have done a lovely job of that. I do want to belabor the potluck analogy for a minute. Some people don't like potluck. Some people have food allergies. And what about if I bring, my favorite hunter pie dish and nobody eats it? And then my poor feelings about that. So let me step off for a second. And I'm a public administrationist. So I professionally am concerned with bureaucracies, how government gets done. Not what government chooses to do, which is the realm of value pluralism, but how government does it. And in the sort of orthodox literature of public administration, that is a separate thing. And we go back to Max Weber, so everybody gets to name their favorite person. We go back to Max Weber, who, if he had his way, we would be served by automatons, robot clerks in the courts and so on, and they would take care of things neutrally. No biases, all citizens look the same, doesn't matter what hat you're wearing or anything else, just we have a function. That would be cool. And maybe AI is going to get us there. Maybe. But more likely, we are loading everything, even walking into the DMV to get your driver's license renewed, loading everything with values. And, you know, for me to load up a word or a term or a question even with a bunch of values then requires you to respond. And you can choose to, you know, meet value with value and have an argument. You can just, you know, and go about your business. Or we may ask each other for clarification. Ask and ask and ask some more. What the provost didn't mention was that I was an interrogator in the Army, and one of the things that they, you know, worked into us was anytime you have a question, the next thing out of your mouth is, what else? And what else? And you exhaust that until your guest would be, you know, out of answers. And then you can act and work from it. I don't think we have much patience these days to ask what else, to sort of trace things back. If it doesn't fit on a reel, then, you know, a lot of people aren't patient enough for it. So, third part of my intro is on my personal part, I'm a curmudgeon. I like being a hermit up in the hills. This is the biggest crowd I've been to since the last time I was here. This is, you know, and you know, when you're armchair philosophizing, thinking about the world, you can sort of determine your own limits of patience and your own extent of inquiry. And I like to think that I go pretty far with that. But sometimes I need feedback. So tonight, I want some feedback. And I'm really looking forward to the questions from all of you more than what you've got. Thank you.
Jay?
So I'm the one person on the stage who's not an academic, which is both lonely and exciting. And I think I think we have to acknowledge sort of the space that this conversation is happening in, the world that it's happening in. In a previous life, I got arrested many times for protests, all in California, which is why I'm back in Maine. And was a part of a very strong activist community that was working on anti-corporate issues. So we were protesting Goldman Sachs, Ford Motor Company, some of the biggest multinational corporations that have incredible power, talking about power. And I learned a lot in that space, and not to take it back to a potluck analogy, but there is, what I did find was that there are roles and spaces for everyone to fill. And I think in this moment, there's a time and a moment for everybody in this room to maybe feel like I need to be in the streets. There's also a time and a moment to be having these conversations. And if you look back to a lot of the revolutionary movements in the world, they weren't just all in the streets. There wasn't just all violence. There were conversations like this happening, which played a huge role in determining what happened next. And so I know there's a lot of energy in the room, a lot of energy in the world right now for what do we do with this? I feel anxiety, I feel stress, I feel incredible pain. I have friends that are disappearing. And I want the message to be that there is a role and a space for everybody. It doesn't necessarily fit what you might be seeing on TV or on social media. And so with that, I'll ask this question to connect us back to this topic. You know, where do we see pluralism working well in everyday life today? Do we have examples that we can say, yes, that is a pluralistic idea that we are living or experiencing every day? I open that up to any of the panelists.
I'm not sure I buy the assumption that we do see a pluralistic system that is working. One of the things we were talking about before is many students that I will speak with will say, I'm not sure it's real. I'm not sure you can really do that. I think the closest I have seen it is in some classrooms And many of our classrooms don't have that much diversity, but some of them that are cross-listed or like ethics, which is a core class and has people from many different backgrounds, then we get some different points of view. But I don't think we have a lot of opportunities to actually see it work.
So I want to.
Just ask the panelists. I saw some in the. If you could speak in the direction of your microphone, I think it will help people hear. If I'm.
That's awkward.
Thank you. Pretend you're talking to me. Actually, that helped talk. I did. Yeah.
I moved mine because I'm going to talk to Michelle.
Okay.
So I think I agree with you overall. I think that nationally, there's not a good model of pluralism right now because of, I think, some of the power dynamics that we've talked about. I think also the ways in which, as David said, our attention span has shortened. There's not necessarily a lot of tolerance for or space for nuance. But I do have a really kind of unwavering faith in the ability to personally do these things in classroom environment, right? That that's the hope, at least. Whether or not it actually comes through is another thing. But in these kinds of moments, I think it's really important to think about what are the spaces that we have influence within, and how do we use our, whether we want to label it privilege or power or whatever, to open up those kinds of spaces to invite students in and to say, this is a place where you can be authentically you. This is a place where we want you to express what you think, but then actually allow those things to happen, right? And I think that's the challenge, is it's very easy to make an argument or talk the talk, but then I think the real challenge is walking the walk. And I think one of the ways that we measure our success in that is, are our students showing up? Are they participating? Is it a one-way conversation or is it a collaborative conversation? So I agree. I think that it's very hard to see where pluralism is taking place. I know that my students in the course that I took here to these events last semester, they oftentimes felt like, okay, pluralism's great, but where is this actually going on? But I think that's where we really have to like look within and think about, okay, where can we foster, or at least ask these kinds of questions.
Do you have different points of view in your education democracy class?
Yes.
Where's that unwavering faith that you refer to come from?
Naivete? That's a really excellent question. I don't
You said it.
I don't know. Like, I think it comes from, I don't know, like, I don't want to sound like super cheesy or anything, especially because David.
You said
David
unwavering
pointed out.
faith. I mean,
I think I don't know. I think it comes from just like my general, I don't know. I just have a general hope that kind of to invoke the 1906 White Sox talking to Kevin Costner in Iowa, like, if we build it, they will come. Thank you to those who got the reference. But I don't know, this is like a really clumsy, terrible answer. But I think it's my own faith in humanity that if we, which might, like I said, naivete. But I think if we open up the spaces and we are authentic in our interactions and care about the people who we come in contact with, we can foster these kinds of environments. That if I say, I value your voice, then I need to create space where it actually comes across that I value your voice and you can feel that.
Can I? All right. So a lot of you have probably at least heard the quote from Thomas Hobbes that life is nasty, brutish, and short. It's truncated, but essentially what he's saying is that without us coming together and forming a society and agreeing to some sort of rules of behavior, we're all going to fight each other over the same piece of meat, and the extinction of humankind will ensue. And while I'm not quite the same level of darkness as Hobbes in that sense. I like to contrast it with your naivete, which, you know, I guess that would be Rousseau's view, that we get together for the greater aggrandizement of our potential achievements in a society. And that, well, I'd like to join you there, but I just can't. I just can't. And
There's a lot of evidence that says
Right.
you're right.
right, and so the solution in my mind for some of this, and even going, how do we have value pluralism? How do we converse in these ways? Is better mechanisms. All right, we have a constitution. That's a pretty good mechanism for how to do this. We also have, you know, the rights that go along with it, the right to protest. Now you have to file at the clerk, and you hope the clerk is going to be that Max Weber type neutral clerk who will let you file for your protest demonstration, whether you're left, right, center, or up or down. But we need better mechanisms. Now, to combat my issue with our short attention span, which is not our fault. That comes on from the people that Jay was protesting once upon a time. That write your things down. Have your opinions. Write them down. Put pencil to paper, pencil, because you're going to change them. But put pencil to paper and write some of these things down. Not type them on the internet behind your anonymous username. Not even in class in a discussion board. Write it down, pencil, paper, look at it. I don't care what kind of writer you are. But when you go through that process, your thoughts, your opinions sink more, and you actually have to think about them rather than just voice them. We can all voice them, and it's our right to do so. I think we need to think about them a little more before we voice them. And, you know, I'll tell you mine, but you got to ask.
I'd just like to add real briefly.
Yeah, I was going to actually ask you a question.
I just had real briefly in terms of I like the idea of education as a model of a place where pluralism can work for all the reasons you cited, but also because as an educator, at least I screw it up all the time. You know, there'll be some classes where it feels like almost every day is really good because the students bring a ton to it. But generally speaking, some days I'll feel like it went great. Some days it just sputtered and died. And you're constantly evaluating new generations of students and how you communicate with them and how they connect to the ideas that you're bringing. And you never get to stop doing that as long as you actually want to participate. And I feel like that's another important part of how pluralism works. It's not a thing you just get right.
Yeah, Ron, can I just follow up a little bit also is that, you know, I've seen you communicate like in the media, you know, another polarizing institution in American life. In higher ed, in the classroom, in forums like this, in post-election forums, you communicate in a certain way that is very different from the way you communicate about politics at a faculty party. And I'm wondering whether your choice in this way is in some ways driven by a commitment to pluralism and neutrality, you know, as you enter a role of a professor, a teacher, a commentator, as an expert, or is it some other value that's kind of driving the discourse when you move between these various spaces?
I think it's mainly driven by my sense of what I owe the people I'm talking to. If I'm talking at a party, I'm just trying to be witty. If I'm talking to a class, I'm trying to clarify a difficult concept that we're all exploring together. And if I'm talking to a reporter, frankly, I'm usually just trying to clarify stuff. And it's hard because you never know what's going to wind up being used. You can talk for 20 minutes. One time there was a school shooting and the reporter asked me to talk about that. And so I talked about Supreme Court decisions about the Second Amendment for like half an hour. And then at the end, she said, "So how you doing with this stuff?" And I said, "Well, I just had a kid, you know, so I'm scared." The pulled headline, the pulled quote in the article was, "I'm scared." But I just try to provide what I feel like the occasion calls for and what's expected of me to perform there. Well, and that's also in terms of like devices and pluralism, I feel like, as I mentioned before, one of the dangers, but also one of the strengths of this is the specialization and expertise. You know, if we all have a different place in a particular conversation, sometimes you sort of assume a set of arguments, and then you've got to play those out and try to do justice to those, and don't feel like now you're bound to be that guy.
Great. Great. Thank you, Ron. And we would like to actually turn the conversation over to the entire community here. And so we do have students with some microphones who will be circulating in the audience here. And if you'd like to ask a question of the panelists, please raise your hand. We do want to prioritize students first. And so is there a brave student with us today? I think I see one over on the left here, or my left. Justin? Yeah.
I think that quote was from Mark Twain.
I've seen Fitzgerald, and I've also seen Freud. Depends on how you.
Hello. Should I stand up? Hello, everybody. My name's Sam. I'm a student here at USM. And my question for the board, of course, we're bringing it back to the potluck. I like what you were saying earlier on the attention span of the younger generation, because the way I feel, a lot of my friends can't even learn the recipe. Speaking of pluralism and how it's kind of hard to even bring up concepts like that now, and with all these, what do we think the solution to those situations would be when we can't even get the conversation started?
Down.
Write your opinion down. And as soon as you say, I hate X or I like Y, then you're naturally going to sort of fill it out a little bit more, right? So with our potluck, like, I like meat. Okay, how do you like your meat prepared? Well, now I like grilled meat. Okay, what, in the shape of a dinosaur, or on a, what do you want? How do you want it? You start writing it down, you start filling it out, and you get more informed. You're going to say, wait a second, how do I get from here to there? So you do a little research, and maybe you get research from the worst cook in the world. I don't know who that is, but maybe you go to the McDonald's cookbook and you figure out how to make a burger. Maybe you go to who's a chef? I don't eat out enough, right? But I don't want you going to the potluck with your Uber Eats order, right? Mm. So have your values, but understand why you have those values. And that's a better place to have a conversation than just saying, I like it or I hate it. Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, it's hard to concentrate for more than 30 seconds. Right? Anybody bored already? Right? So, I mean, and we've been, acculturated to this. Everything's coming at us. And, I can't sit around and watch my dog, take a crap in the yard without pulling out my phone because I'm bored. She's pretty quick.
I don't think we all need to be such passive vessels about it.
No, I didn't say you have to, you write it down and then lock it away and, ignore it.
I framed that wrong. I'm going to go back. You don't know the recipes. I'm the one here who's not a historian. I'm also not a philosopher, though I play one on TV. I heard Tressie McMillan Cottom speak at Bowdoin last week. And she was talking about how activism and passion is carried down through generations. That's where you get that recipe. And I think one of the challenges is the young people in my life do have attention spans and they have capacity for depth. But I think we play roles so often where we feign neutrality or objectivity. I'm in front of a classroom, I'm teaching ethics, I'm going to pretend I'm objective and neutral, really? When I have insidious control over everything that's going on in the class? So I think we're trying to model something that's not real, which probably propagates this kind of superficiality. But if we have opinions and passions that we can support with evidence without being offensive and shutting down other conversations, I think we're providing some depth to the, I don't want to go back to the pot.
No, it's okay. I was gonna.
Okay.
So with the recipes, as you said, handed down. My mother-in-law's handwriting is at best, the chicken scratch. And if I take one of her recipes and try and make what she made, it's like Crisco. Oh, I'm not going to use Crisco, right? Or how about Aunt Jemima's syrup? No, not going to use that, right? So we take these recipes and we still like what they were, but we're going to change them a little bit. We're going to update them. We have to update them as well, and that requires some reflection. What taste do we like? What do we like in it? And so, even though we're influenced by what's come before us, we have to apply it in context. And, today's context is weird.
Well, I think one of the things that we oftentimes struggle with is I can't tell you how many students. So I oftentimes meet with students prior to the beginning of the semester, so that I can get to know who they are as human beings and not just names on a list, right? And it's absurd to me how many of them say to me, this is the first time that a professor has ever talked to me about what my interests are, that they've reached out in this way. And I think that kind of goes over to our classrooms as well, in that I think we also have, I kind of call it this unholy alliance that exists within schools, that teachers say, don't challenge my authority and I won't challenge you. And we'll just kind of get along and we'll do the work and you'll move on. And when we do that, we forsake the ability for our students to learn how to ask questions and find answers and actually sit with things in ways that aren't just 30-second engagements, which I don't think is just a youth problem. I mean, I hope my parents don't watch this, but they escape to their corners with their Kindles later. This is kind of where everything has become needing a screen. And what we need to do is we need to de-screenify students and have them have these authentic interactions with both each other, with actual physical things, and think about, or rather not think about, but not assume that just because somebody is born past the year 2000, that they inherently know how to use technology in a rich, meaningful way. And if we start those kinds of processes in elementary school and understand that pluralism is always a process, and that we're not responsible for building the house, we're responsible for adding on, so that as students cycle through K-12 and then come into colleges, they're constantly building on an ability as opposed to just being introduced to some of these things for the first time.
We have another hand, couple of hands. Are you a student? Me? Yes. Oh, yeah. Yes, okay. You could get a microphone here, and then the next hand that I saw is right here in the fourth row.
I was actually Adam Schmidt's student last semester. I was gonna ask if you guys believe that pluralism requires that we're all working with the same groundwork. If I can have a meaningful conversation with someone across the aisle, if we believe in completely different base facts, is it possible or not?
We were just talking about that in the green room or the brown room or whatever room we were just in. Last semester I had an ethics class and we were visited by some folks from Maine Public. You guys heard this story already. So yeah. And we asked the students what their main source of news was. And out of 25 students, 23 primarily get their news from social media. Some of them were TikTok. There was one NPR and one New York Times. I think as long as we have different realities, such different realities, there's got to be an analogy here with your house or a book or something, the writing of a book. But
I want to bring it back to the potluck.
no, I think it's whatever the beams that you use to build the house. If you don't have, I'm not going to try it, but you'll figure it out. If you have to have a common set of facts, a common reality. If not, you're not discussing issues. You're in parallel universes, if you will. I think that is a big part of the problem. And we need to know how to critically think about information. And all of us old people too, about how to assess what's real. AI is messing with us. And we're all evidencing our own reality. What is the name of that organization? Bellingcat? Something like that? Bellingcats? That is trying to train people, all people, activists particularly, to verify, deliberate. What's the third one? Anybody know what the third one is? But there's 3 things that they insist on. And this is the group that was responsible for getting out the real story about the killing in Minneapolis. And what they did is they moved faster with facts than the misinformation could flow. And that's really hard to do and requires a lot of solidarity, community, teamwork. But if we don't have common facts, we're making completely different arguments about different realities.
I have an analogy for you,
I know you do.
but it's not a house.
Okay.
So we go back to everybody's favorite topic, semiotics,
Right, love it.
and the meaning of signs, right? We've ascribed, like thinking about this in terms of traffic, right? That red means stop and green means go. And what happens when we no longer agree that those are what those mean. And I think that's the process that's coming up here is what does it mean to talk to somebody about traffic patterns if they think red means go and green means stop and you think the opposite? And what's the rectification of how you bring those two things together? We talked a lot about social media prior to this, and I think one of the problems with social media is it creates this echo chamber where you only hear people who agree with whatever your take is, and you are also, expertise has its problems, but you are also inculcated in an idea that you can be the expert on everything if you just do the right research. But absent critical media literacy skills and the critical skills of reading and close reading and understanding how arguments are constructed, without those things, you don't really have the ability to understand the importance of what you don't know and don't have access to, and therefore what questions you need to ask in order to figure out those things.
I got something to add, and then this will go to you, Ron. It makes sense for this. So what's our common ground that we can start on, even if we, dispute facts or whatever else? But as people all in a country, at the very least, right, we have practices that have gotten us to this point in time. Those practices evolve into norms, which means things we, agree probably work, so we don't have to reinvent the wheel every time. Those norms become values. We then take those values and we vote with them to become politics and policy and laws, regulations, and that's what we have. So we do have something in common. It's a constitution, right? And while we can debate the Constitution, and we do, we also used to have a mechanism in the courts to sort of deliberate the interpretation of the Constitution. So in the end, we had a truth. We had, in this country, an American truth in the end, and it came down to the 9 people at the Supreme Court if it had to. But we had something in common. If we dispute that, if you don't like the Constitution, you're going to have a hard time. Now, aside from the formality of the Constitution, if you don't have your pocket Constitution handy right now, there's also something just called the social contract. So this is going to go to you because I'm going to let you explain it better. But that basically, by being amongst others, you have to sort of figure out ways to get along. But I don't know, a lot of people don't seem to want to. They just want the conflict because everything else is taken care of. We're bored. Let's fight.
And nobody's observing the Constitution, or those who make determinations about it are not observing
Just
that.
need deeper pockets to conduct lawfare.
Ron, did you want to talk about the social contract?
Yeah.
Or do you want to get more questions in?
Real quick, one of the things about democracy, and this was a big issue for the school of pluralists in the U.S., like in the 50s, is that democracy depends to an enormous degree upon people assuming it works. The analogy I often use is Wile E. Coyote, right? If he runs off the cliff and doesn't know he's run off the cliff, he's fine. He'll just keep going. But if he looks down and realizes that he's suspended over midair, he falls to his death. And when you've got lots of people in public life trying to convince the public that democracy doesn't work, that can become a sort of self-fulfilling prophecy. If the shared fact we have in common is, yeah, this whole thing is over, then that becomes kind of like a suicide pact. So there are some things we definitely want to share in common, but a shared belief that we're broken irreparably is, I don't think, one of them.
Okay, we have a question over here.
Hi, I'm a student here at USM. I'm actually a women and gender studies major, so we are just dipping our feet into the water in terms of politics and stuff. So basically, like, I care very much about human rights, and I often feel like an outcast because of how much I care about human rights and this sort of thing. I often feel like most people aren't aware enough about these kind of issues that are present in our society. And normally when I'm around certain people, like, let's just say my family or whatever, like, I have to stay quiet about my views because I don't want to rock the boat. So, like, I'm trying to learn how to hold different views together. I wonder how I can do that.
Did you write it down just now? So bonus points for that. And this is going to be the unpopular thing, probably, but sometimes I enjoy that I've kept my opinion to myself. And I don't know if anybody else sort of shares that, I don't know, intellectual superiority to know that my opinion is just my opinion and I'm going to keep it and I'm not sharing it with anybody. Sometimes I get off on that a little bit. And if that gets you through Thanksgiving dinner, cool. That's also why you go to college, so you can, then get out there and talk about it.
I surprisingly have a different perspective.
We're great tennis partners.
I'm going to say especially with something like human rights. Maybe it can be helpful to think about how you're not speaking just for yourself and how vital it is that you speak for others who you're probably advocating for. It tends not to make that easier. Your voice probably shakes more because there's more at stake. But I think there are some questions and some issues that are so important that you ought not stay quiet about them.
Another question. I think we have one right here.
Hi, everybody. My name is Caroline Freespirit, and I'm a graduate student in social work. And I have a question about the conversation that went before with Dr. Schmidt, the younger.
Thank you.
Wow.
That was just a really fantastic moment. Thank you. I needed that today.
I saw you make the statement that you had boundless optimism about plurality, and you got sort of like checked on that and said, well, what's that based on? And all you could say in response was naivete. And it made me think that there's a lot of pluralism around in this world, but we're probably a little too focused on the here and now. And when I take a look, there's a certain cycle to history. We've been here before. we will get through this eventually. And also, when you look over up north, you take a look for plurality. I see the Canadian federal government seems to be working relatively well, and Prime Minister Carney also gave a wonderful speech to the World Economic Forum, I believe, about the need for middle powers to cooperate. And he recognized that we're in a time of great powers and of authoritarianism, which is not much for plurality, but is it possible that we need to look wider and further apart in time and space? And leave it up to you to answer. Thank you.
Yeah, I think we're very American centric in the United States. I mean, even ascribing a demonym to ourselves that encapsulates two continents or one continent, however we want to define it, is really indicative of that. And I think my comment of naivete was definitely tongue in cheek, because I think what it really comes from is, I think one of the ways that I define myself first and foremost is as a teacher. I was a middle school teacher before I became a professor. And I think that's actually where my optimism comes from, is working with kids. And that they also allow us different perspectives and viewpoints than what we allow ourselves to have as adults, right? That I think there's a lot of grace we can give ourselves in exactly what you said of, we've been here before, we can get through it, we'll probably be here again. But to me then, that becomes, how do we gain power from the people who got through it and how they got through it? And how can we look to different, more creative ways to think about and make sense of the world around us? And how can we look to other places and see how they've done it? And also other peoples in our own country, right? There's a lot to be learned from our indigenous neighbors and the people of color who comprise our country, who have been doing this work for a very long time, in ways that we don't acknowledge typically until a white person does it and we say, oh, wow, what a great idea.
We have a question in the back, and then after this question, I think we can open it up to anyone else. I'll lift the ban on non-students.
Hi. Okay. I'm a student here, USM Sociology. Taking a lot of classes with Michelle. Hi.
Hey, Julia.
I guess, first of all, I raised my hand because I found the comment about like the red light and the green light interesting, because also we have to remember that there are people who have red-green color blindness and they can't actually see that they're different. So there's like that idea of like people not even being able to witness, or not, some people not being willing to witness that there is an issue or that something exists or something like that. And then my other question / sort of argument is about, like, we've been talking about pluralism and assuming that, you know, we talk about how wonderful it is and how important it is, but kind of making the assumption that it's something that everyone strives towards. And I think in a lot of instances, it's not. There are a lot of people who have no desire to understand how other people think or feel on all aspects of like political spectrum. And I think in particular, I find myself sometimes feeling this, and I have to like check myself, but a lot of times in like an academic setting, it's also like, there's definitely an echo chamber sort of aspect, especially for myself as a sociology major. Like, you know, even like we're all sitting in a room and talking about issues and stuff, and we all feel very similarly about things. But then when I take a class that's like, maybe there's a lot of people in there that have different views, it's definitely not conversation based. And so we don't end up having that like access. Like if I'm taking an accounting class, I'm like, all these people probably have different views politically than me, but we never actually talk about that because that's not what this class is about. And then if there is a class about politics, we all feel similarly. I don't know. I just wonder if like, how is it possible to have those conversations when it's like people aren't seeking them out?
That's a great question. You asked before, Adam, about when I talk to reporters about politics. And one of the things that annoys me is that they want to talk always at election time. And then once the elections are over, I don't hear from them again for 2 years or 4 years. And it's just, they want to talk about campaigning because that's the part of politics that Americans think of as politics and that we focus on, where you present a thing and you beat somebody. And governing is also really interesting. Like I'll tell them, there's really great anecdotes about getting a bill passed. And there's a whole conversation to be had there about the need to maintain a conversation that's ongoing with people with whom you disagree about all kinds of stuff and how you make that possible. And I don't think we're very good at teaching that. I'm a political scientist who believes very much in the importance of debate and disagreement and argument. And I'm absolutely 100% uncomfortable with it. In my family situations where I have an uncle who says awful things, I just shut up because I just don't want to fight. It makes me uncomfortable. But that's not what I think is the right thing to do. You have to find a way to exist with that ongoing. And the same is true with people who just don't want to have that conversation. And you have to ask, like, how important is it to do this? And does pluralism, by definition, has to make room for the people who don't want to engage it? But when it becomes sort of a threat to the ability to get to serve the needs of the people that you're there for, then somehow it has to be confronted. You have to find a way to say, I know, I don't like this either, but that we have to find a way to share some set of assumptions and visions enough that we can move forward on things that at the very least we agree are a crisis.
Julia, that accounting scenario, why aren't we talking about differences around accounting practices that may root in social structure, in disparity? There was a student last semester who said we should be having conversations that have to do with pluralism in all our classes, whether it be chemistry or accounting. I mean, we're all in areas where we talk for a living. That's all we do. And that would take a commitment on the part of the university. That's hard because some classes, bio classes, accounting classes, have certain standards that they have to meet by the end of the semester. And it takes a long time, as you well know, to have a conversation, especially if you are promoting differences of opinion on controversial subjects. So how much do we want to give to this to really promote it? Because we could, especially if we did cross-disciplinary work, we could work and should maybe conversations about where the tensions are in every one of our classes. But it would mean there would be, if I can do this, utility costs there, right?
Negative externalities.
So I have a question, right? Dean Mondor in the back is helping distribute the microphone. So if you want to participate, just raise your hand and he'll try to distribute the water. There's a lot of hands up. Thank you.
4 in the queue.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Riri, and I am a student here at USM, health science major. My question is, how can we keep the idea of open speech without making some people feel excluded?
Could you repeat how you finished without making people feel
Excluded.
excluded? Thank you.
I mean, that's a central question. The best I can do generally is to try to help people to articulate what they're saying, without sounding like I'm downgrading their contribution. Which can be difficult to do in a context where I'm the professor, and they're the student. But the need to include a kind of a quality of experience in the classroom without making anyone feel locked out is sort of a perpetual struggle.
I think also, how do you invite people in, right? That if you're teaching and you're always hearing from the same people, how do you, it might be publicly and it might be personally, but how do you encourage folks who might not be participating in a way where they might feel excluded to contribute? And sometimes that might be, first of all, I think acknowledging when they do and not just like arguing against them or like shutting them down in some way. But I think it's also recognizing through when they write things down to go back and be able to say like, hey, I saw that you wrote this. I would really love you to bring this idea to class. And to give some validation that way. I think those can be really powerful mechanisms to just help somebody see that they're recognized.
Real quick, so I have a non-academic, non-classroom example. I worked up in the 2nd District of Maine, Congressional District, where we were organizing in communities all over Worcester County, Washington County. And one of the biggest challenges was getting people to have that conversation, to feel comfortable enough to have that conversation. The overwhelming sort of filter over everything was economics and class. I was from Portland. I was showing up. They all said, we know you. You show up every couple of years. You stick around. You do a few things and you disappear. And so what I figured out pretty quick was it was a trust issue. I wasn't really real to these folks. And so we spent 5 years working in these communities. And those conversations started happening, but it took time. And I think so much of what we don't feel we have today is time. We don't have the patience, we have the time to invest in those relationships that will allow those conversations to happen. They're not going to happen because you invited someone to dinner one time. They might happen when they come to your event the 15th time. And so my message in non-classroom experience has been take the time, invest in those moments and those people, but also have very low expectations.
Hello, my name's Jaden. I'm a grad student and in the ETEP program. I have more of an observation rather than a question. And I studied rehabilitation before this and worked as a therapist for a year. So I love body language and just observing people in their fields. I think it's interesting how the panel just has one, that I'm assuming is a cis woman, and the rest are male. I thought that was really interesting when we're discussing democracy, if that has any bias within some decisions and topics we're talking about tonight. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's pretty hard to miss. Back in, I think it was the 2016 election. I was watching the Republican primary debate, and my kid, who was like 6 at that point, said, "Dad, I'm watching this show, and a lot of the people on that stage are boys." And I that could be a teaching moment, I guess. But yeah, it's an ongoing question about how we think about who obviously deserves a place in the room and at the conversation, and what stands out and what doesn't, and the things that we notice and the things that we notice and decide to move on anyway. Yep.
Green, okay.
Hi, I'm Brett. I'm a first-year political science student here at USM, and I just have a question. When I'm at work, I work with a lot of people who are across the aisle from me, and unfortunately, I have the mindset of I see a boiling hot pot and I stick my hand right in it, and I always get myself into a situation where I'm worked up. I have to remove myself from the situation, and it feels to me like a lot of people that I work with are very like anti-academic, anti-intellectual, sometimes for good reasons. Sometimes it's like very jaded personal stuff, and I get that. But I think it's interesting to me that a lot of the time they're always going to have that one martyr study or person that's like of the intellectual class that stepped outside and has this study that happens to perfectly align with their bias. Or maybe like an alternative media figure had the red carpet rolled out for them for like 5 comedian podcasts that have advertisements all over them. And it's just, how do you combat that kind of alternative media that legitimizes people who are just, for lack of a better word, full of shit? Thank you.
We have to be real, particularly as academics. You know, we talk for a living. Sometimes there's better ways to communicate than with words. And we need to be genuine. We get in our heads and we don't talk commonalities. And that, the frame we usually say is, oh, we have to get down to the same level as a level of commonality is lower. I think it's an avoidance mechanism for a lot of us in academia. And we have more control over an intellectual question than we do over a social question that requires that we be involved with other people and feelings and unexpected occurrences.
Back?
Hi, I'm Paula Gerstenblatt. I'm a professor of social work. No disrespect to the panel. Thank you to the student who raised the issue of composition. I'd also like to make a plug in terms of discipline diversity. I'd love to see an artist on this panel too, speaking of ways to communicate that defy language and words. So that's just one plug I'm going to make there. The other thing is speaking of Freire, I had a long conversation in my class this afternoon about Freire. We were reading Pedagogy of the Oppressed. And one of the things that we brought up was Freire's concept of naming the world. And I just want to do that and take a moment that sometimes listening to conversations, particularly as an academic and with academics, and not exclusive to that, is that we're kind of talking around where we are right now. And it's almost like old rules for a new game. So while I think we can have lofty conversations about pluralism, I heard the word neutrality mentioned once, which made me bristle a bit, because I don't think what's going on right now, while I do take the long view and know that, as Carolyn said, that, you know, pendulum swing, we've been through tough times, these are our tough times, but I think we really have to put the nail on the head here of really where we are right now. We are in a position of, I don't know about you, but I feel like the moral injury that I experience every day, just being subjected to things internally and externally. I literally wake up at night in a panic attack. I mean, I'm older, I'm 69. I worry about my students, I worry about my children, that it's a horrible thing to feel relief that I'm approaching 70, because I don't want to see where all this is going this far. And I want to be more hopeful, but I'm also quite realistic. And I think we need to talk about the fact that all this is great, but we have to really face where we are right now. We have the FBI going in Georgia and pulling boxes of ballots. We have a Supreme Court that's stacked. We have people being shot, harassed, abducted, taken to places we don't know. Where we are right now in terms of graft, in terms of talk about truth, we have a pathological liar that is our president. And I really think that if we don't name the world, name this moment and where we are right now, these conversations feel almost superfluous to me. And I'm in no disrespect to my colleagues.
Thank you, Paul. And I'm this is also a perennial debate in American history about whether ideas matter, and I'm just wondering if any of you have a reaction to.
Paula, thank you for bringing that up. And I still have reservations about being here to have a conversation at this time. Thank you. And if you had 300 people, you have time to get 300 people together, 300 motivated, engaged people together, we should be doing something, not talking about it. But those aren't mutually exclusive, right? And I think that's one of the reasons why we are so interested in engaging with students, with everybody who's here, because that can be where things start. At the same time I'm saying that, Paula, this will connect in a second. Just came back from a travel course in Puerto Rico. And people pride Puerto Ricans on their resilience and their recovery and the solidarity and the family and warm culture. And it's a beautiful thing. And it is an excuse for not sufficiently investing in the people of Puerto Rico, in the island. If we continue to have, I'm sorry because I really do admire this, but that undying faith that things will work out, are we motivated to do anything about it if we can assuage ourselves with lack of reality? I don't know. I don't know the answer to that. And every day when I'm in front of students and my own kids, I've got to fight myself from saying, there's no point. We're not getting anywhere. It is too bad to do anything about. I can't go there, so the only place I think that we have left, this is going to sound even cheesier than Adam, and I mean that in the most positive way.
You can mean it either way. That's fine.
I'm not a religious person. I wish I was. I wish I would had a faith in a God and an afterlife. I do believe our higher spirit lies in each other and in solidarity. And I think that is our only way through it. With your incredible, beautiful art and my words and all of us working from our strengths and fighting. But in order to do that, you have to recognize that there's a threat, that there's harm, that there's terror. You can't ignore it. You can't paint it over.
I remember a point when I was in grad school, and it was the 90s, and I felt like it was a problem that a lot of people said that democracy was a good thing and that the democracy was what we should have, but a lot of them had no idea what the word democracy actually meant. And I thought if that word gets evacuated of meaning, that's a big problem. But I feel like now we have a lot of people who know what democracy means and they're opposed to it, which seems to me like a bigger issue. And what we're doing here is having a conversation about pluralistic democracy at a time when the condition of pluralism, the multiplicity of the community all around us, including our students, is under direct attack. And yeah, as you said, people are being kidnapped, they're being disappeared, they're being shot. So this is not a time for solely academic exercises, but the question of democracy is never actually just a solely academic question. It either is embedded in the way you live your life and what you believe is possible, or it's not really a democratic thing. It's just sort of an idea. The political science pluralists in the 50s invented this phrase, democratic ceremonials, where we show up at a place and go through this motions of democracy because that makes us feel good. And they said, that's enough. As long as people feel like, yeah, this counts, then it counts. But under circumstances like the present, I don't think it does.
I want to respond a little bit to what you said. And what Paula brought up, and Paula, thank you for bringing up what you said. I really deeply agree with how you ended your statement, Michelle, as somebody who's also not religious, and I think meaning comes from our interactions with each other. My hope is how I get up and function, because I think it's really important to name these things. I think it's very important to have these conversations in class with students. I hope that I show up in ways for vulnerable members of our community and marginalized members of our community. So for me, it's not, kind of like I said earlier, there's a lot of playing school that goes on where we just kind of say things that we think need to be said, and we try to talk pretty and just kind of go on with it. I have 3 kids. Every day when I put them on a bus, I'm like, I hope I see them again. Right? Mm-hmm. I have friends who are refugees in this country who have found themselves in a space that was what they were trying to escape. I have a dawning realization every single day that the Constitution isn't a framework of laws, it's a suggestion at best. But if I lose hope in other people, what's it all for? And it's through that hope that's motivating to move forward and do this work. Pluralism is important to me because democracy is important to me. And my concern is to use what I have found is a very dated idiom. So my apologies to everybody under 30. We don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater, right? We don't want to say all these terrible things are going on. We don't want to turn a blind eye to them. We need to have a wide swath of people talking about these problems and helping us understand that it's not just the policymakers, but it's the artists, it's the people who understand how we bring beauty and understanding to a world where it's easy to not recognize those things. So I think it's really like how both of these things exist together. How do we open up space to talk about these things, to name exactly what Jaden named about the people who's sitting up here, to do these kinds of things, to push back and question what this is all about. But to me, it has to be rooted in an idea that there's goodwill that exists, because oh my God, what if there's not?
Thank you. And we only unfortunately have time for one more question, and we're going to come here to the front. Sorry.
Okay, hi. Thank you so much for sharing all your opinions and your commentary today. I just wanted to put out there that I think sometimes there's a danger of oversimplifying things. Because I'm not seeing exactly what you're saying when you're saying, well, the under 20s this and the over 30s that, so to speak. The sexism and stuff like that isn't the full story. There's a lot more nuance and a lot more details. It's not just like women have these problems, men have these problems. Everyone has shared problems, and there's a lot more nuance and details to this. So I think we need to figure out what to do ourselves and move forward with that and not oversimplify things as adults. So we need to take ownership of who we are and how we present ourselves. So it's our responsibility to fix the problem, not to just put it out there and say, well, let's discuss it and talk about it. It's our responsibility to get up and fix the problem and not just talk the talk, but walk the walk, as we said earlier. Figure out ourselves. Like, could the younger people have their own potluck? Like that kind of concept. That's not exactly it, because I don't want to oversimplify it. And sorry to bring up the potluck again.
No, it was really good full circle moment. Thank you.
I think that's a great way if one of you wants to respond to that comment. If that, and maybe Adam, if you wanted to finish off, or David, thinking about what the role of education is versus activism, and are they mutually exclusive? Are they in conflict with one another? Or what is the role of education in a time of political conflict?
Can I answer a question that's sort of been asked?
Sure.
Instead, Paula, if I may, you're pissed off, rightfully so. Look where we've come. All right, the U.S. is not on top. Go to the Worldwide Governance Index. Check the trend lines. Okay, we're falling down. We've resorted to violence because the Constitution doesn't work, because talking doesn't work. The only thing they have is violence. How do you stop violence? My employer's sitting here, so I'm going to tamp it down a little bit. But getting to your point, the glory years of American universities may be arguably the 1960s and 70s, where they were active and it was dangerous because we were meeting a force with a like force. I'm not going to rouse any more rabble, but think about it, and I can breathe a little tear gas.
I'll throw out quickly that I think education and activism are really important partners. I really liked the question about like accounting earlier, right? That if we're really engaging students in disciplinary work, regardless of what that discipline is, we're inviting them to understand why the things that we accept as the norms of those disciplines are the things that we accept as norms, and how there can be a different way to think. And that education at its best is understanding that nothing's really settled, and how do we ask questions to understand what different ways of thinking about things can be. But that's not the end of the story. The end of the story then is, how do we take action about that? How do we share out what we learn? How do we think about how we're implicated in these things, and what are we motivated to do? Because if we're just learning things to nod our head and say like, oh, that was really nice to know, it doesn't have meaning beyond that moment. And instead, how do we develop within our students, whether we're talking about public school students or we're talking about university students, how do we help develop the capacity through what we ask them to do to understand that taking action is inherent in learning?
Thank you, Adam. And President Edmondson, would you mind coming to the podium to finish the program?
Please join me in thanking our panelists and our moderators. So thank you. And I want to again thank you all for joining us tonight. I am just really honored that you are here. Education is an act of freedom. We're a university. Our mission is to educate. Education is doing something. And so that's why we're here together. And I'm so proud of everyone who asked questions. I hope that you felt there was some measure of pluralism and action as people raised questions and made their points. And we'll continue this conversation on March 25th, same room, same time. And that conversation will be led by students who are scholars of American democracy. And as fabulous as these folks are, it's going to get even better. So please mark your calendars and come back. Thank you.